It's time now for the John Harris Podcast on the AirNetwork.net. Now, here's sports journalist extraordinaire, John Harris on the Air Network.
Welcome to the John Harris Podcast on AirNetwork.net, joined by NFL scouting guru Dave T. Thomas. Dave, how you doing?
Hey, big guy, we're getting close over here. Santa Claus has been knocking on my door.
Three weeks to the draft. We're going to build up to that, but we're going to spend some time right now talking about the Steelers. We've been having some great conversations about the Steelers and free agency and their draft, who they're looking at, and I believe you have some insight into the Steelers draft that no one else has. Let's get right on it. I'm going to turn it over to you and just let you educate us on what's happening over there at the Steelers right now.
Well, you know, we all know what they need to address on draft day, and that's going to be on defense. However, there could be a sleeper prospect coming through the door, the Northern Illinois wide receiver, Kenny Golladay. Not only did they go up for his pro day, spent a lot of time with him up in Indianapolis in the interview room, so much so that there was a knock, knock, knock on the door. The next team wanted to get in. They then stood around after pro day, worked them out a little bit more, and now they brought them into Pittsburgh. Now, you look at their wide receivers, and they did quite well last year, at least statistically. But when you really dig into the statistics, what do you have? I mean, Darius Hayward, 6 out of 19 passes thrown to him he caught. Coates, 21 out of 49. You cannot survive with wide receivers that catch less than 65% of their passes. You got Coates with 43%. You got Hayward with 31% of his targets that he brought in. Marcus Wheaton, God bless you, man. You just got yourself $1.5 million for every catch that you caught last year, now being paid by the Chicago Bears. You turn around with Martavius Bryant. They're all saying that he's going to get himself reinstated. Yes, but if he gets himself reinstated and he falls off the bubble again, what are they going to be left with? They're just going to be sitting there with Antonio Brown being double-teamed left and right, hoping that Eli Rogers as a slot receiver could move the chains. A big kid like Kenny Golladay, look at him, 6'4", 215 pounds. He's averaged over 9 yards a carry on reverses out of the backfield. Outstanding blocker. He has the second highest blocking grade of any wide receiver in this draft. When you got a big physical receiver like that, it takes a lot of double team coverage off on the other side. I look at this guy and I'm going to run a name by you, and people are going to start choking, but I'm telling you, Kenny Golladay could be another John Stallworth.
Oh, my goodness.
That's how good this kid is. Now, you got to understand one thing. This was a kid that came out of the urban streets up at Chicago. Nobody even knew about him because his school had to discontinue their football program. He ends up getting one scholarship. That's all the way out in North Dakota. After 2 years there, he comes back home to Northern Illinois. 200 receptions in 2 years.
Wow.
I see this kid as a third, fourth round draft pick, and that's where the draft is made, John. It's not made on day 1, day 2. Day 3 is critical for any team.
And for the Steelers, that's always important because a third or fourth round pick means they don't have to pay him first and second round money.
Well, the whole thing, too, is when you look at your roster, you're looking for depth, and that's where your day 3 guys come in. You take a gamble on those guys. A guy might have had an injury. A guy might have had a bad year because he didn't have a quarterback, or the coach got fired and there was turmoil on the team. There's a lot of circumstances out there. You got to understand one thing. There's 4,000 kids that graduate every year from college that are football players. Out of those, that group, only 250 plus are going to be drafted.
Now, what's the difference between Golladay and there's a big time receiver, another MAC school in Western Michigan? What's the difference between those two guys?
Well, here's the thing. Do you gamble on Corey Davis right now that is still unable to work out? I run one name by you, and the Chicago Bear fans are going to cringe, Kevin White. Here's a team that took a gamble on a ball player that was well-established in college but had an injury history. You go back and look at Cody Davis's injuries over the years. Okay, he didn't miss that many games, but there were quite a few issues that built up that later on in the season, the kid really couldn't get going again. Okay, 5,200 plus yards, man, God bless him, and 51 touchdowns. He's definitely a quality talent, But when you're looking out there with a coach, a position coach, a head coach that has never seen him play and is still not able to work the guy out, there's going to be a lot of head scratching when you're sitting in the war room on draft day. You're going to have to rely on your scout. You're going to have to rely on your medical report, and you're going to have to hope and pray that your general manager rolls the dice right.
And football is the one sport where injuries do play a major role. If you have a history of injuries, you have a history of leg injuries, they're not going to disappear. They may go away. You may be able to deal with them to a certain extent, but it does have an impact not only on that part of the body, but one injury tends to lead to another injury when you have that type of situation.
And if you got a ball player that's got an injury history, you know that you're probably going to put him on IR during the year, and you're going to have to find a replacement for him. Do you go for the A-plus guy that might play 12 games for you, or do you go for the A guy that will be out there for 16?
Now, Golladay visited the Steelers on Monday along with some other players. You tell me the Steelers went to his pro day. They also dealt with him at the combine. Do you see there? I think you told me there may be another meeting or something coming up with him.
Yeah, they're scheduling one last one. Understand that at the end of the season, he couldn't get down to the Senior Bowl because in his final game he suffered an elbow injury. But then he shows up in Indianapolis, caught everything in sight. Went up to the pro day, did the same thing. So now they just want to get checks and balances. One doctor wants to look down his throat. The other one wants to look up his boop. If they see each other, then he passes.
Is this the one guy on the Steelers' radar? Since we are talking on the John Harris podcast on the
John Stallworth. Keep saying that name.
You heard it. Steeler fans.
Every time I see him.
Listening.
Hey, listen, I'm telling people out there, the teams right now, that if the Steelers do not sign their left tackle to a long-term contract this year or next year, some smart team is going to come along after the 2018 season and put a big number on that guy when he's restricted.
Well, but it's the Steelers' way that let's see how long we can kind of ride this and maybe not have to. I mean, they're paying a lot of lineman a lot of money. Is that what this is about? We got to try to find some more money to pay him. Let's see if we can stretch it out another year. Hopefully, we can keep him under the radar for another year before we have to really pay the big bucks. Because they're going, like you say, they're going to have to pay him the big bucks.
Outside of Le'Veon Bell, guys without a current contract right now, I would say Villanueva is probably the second most priority.
Wow.
Go look in baseball. Look what the Cleveland Indians did with their shortstop and everything. Better to get him signed early than to get him signed too late. And the great thing in football is, if they don't like you, you don't perform, they cut you the following year. It's called Deadpool money.
A lot of times when you look at a team's draft, you also have to look at what they do or don't do in free agency. Let's look for a minute at what the Steelers have done in free agency, how that will impact on the draft, and what needs, what feel like are the major needs that the Steelers have, and what players do you project, or through your dealings with these teams, a team like the Steelers, where you do have an idea of who they're interested in through their requests for information, who are some of the players that they're targeting?
Well, if you listen to the draft analysts, especially the ones over on ESPN, they're playing checkers over there. I'll give you a chess master move. Obviously, they need. It's obvious, John. They need themselves an edge rusher, and if you look at all of the quality that's out there right now, the second coming of Jared Allen is parked up at Kansas State, and that's Jordan Willis. I mean, you got a guy that could sit back and play strong side outside linebacker, could come up and play the left defensive end spot. Can also move inside if you need to play under tackle, even though he's only 260 pounds. Physical guy, great hitter. You go back and look at last year. 12 times he got to the quarterback. 18 times he took down ball carriers in the backfield. He had 4 quarterback pressures, and he had 49 quarterback hits, along with 52 tackles. You saw what he did up at Indianapolis. He showed that he had the motor. You sit back and watch film on this guy. This guy gives 110% effort. Meanwhile, everybody has him pegged as a round 2 guy. Why? Because everybody wants those 280-pound on edge rushers. I look at this guy. I look at when you got Hayward and Tuitt up front. You bring this guy in. I mean, this is a guy that I would sit and plant at the right outside linebacker position and have him learn behind James Harrison. If I don't go that route with Willis in round one, it's logical that they're probably going to go for a secondary man. If they go for a secondary man, by round three, they better head up to Youngstown State and bring Derek Rivers home to Pittsburgh.
I wanted to ask you about him. How do they compare? How does Willis compare with Rivers? Apparently, Rivers he visited the Steelers this week. The Steelers went to his pro day. Again, not a big deal. It's an hour drive from Youngstown to Pittsburgh. How do those two players compare? Is Rivers a better value pick because you wouldn't have to take him as high?
Here's how I would put it. If I was Jordan Willis, I'd be buying him at Tiffany. If I was Derek Rivers, I'd be buying him at Kay Jewelers. They're both shining diamonds over here, but one's a whole lot more polished than the other.
And so who would meet the Steelers' needs more right now?
Right now, Jordan Willis. There is no edge rusher, not even Myles Garrett, that is more prepared to step into the NFL and star right now than Jordan Willis. Will Jordan Willis go? I say anywhere between 20 to 45 in this draft. Garrett's going to go number one. That's the thing. I love Garrett's ability. I love his athleticism. I love when his motor is on. My problem with Tim, sometimes in the morning I got to bring out the battery charger.
So what is this? This is about Willis's size. It sounds like you're saying him not being.
I told everybody big about Ryan Shazier years ago. Remember him? I told people about Ike Davis, how he fits in with the Steelers. Willis is the perfect fit. You put a lunch pail type blue collar guy out there that's really a blue chip prospect, he's going to make an impact. John, when you hit that quarterback 39 times in 13 games, when you sack him 12 times, when you cause 4 fumbles, when you cause 4 interceptions off your pressures, I don't know. Where I come from, I like some disturbance out on the football field.
So do you project him, whether it's for the
first round?
He's definitely a first round.
First round. If I have my way with one of the teams that I consult with, he's not going to get out of the big blue uniform.
So, we know who you consult with. We'll let folks know eventually about that. If one of those two teams don't get him, do you see him possibly still being there when the Steelers draft in the first round?
Oh, definitely. I don't see him around by the time the Steelers come up in 2, though. Someone will pop on him early in day 2.
Okay, so you mentioned edge rusher. You mentioned secondary for the Steelers. Who are you looking at so they don't take Jordan Willis in the first round? Maybe they decide they want to shop at Kay Jewelers and they look at the kid from Youngstown State. Is there a secondary player who you think or who you envision the Steelers taking in the first round?
My favorite cornerback since I spent buku days down at Louisiana Lafayette, and he resides at the University of Florida, Quincy Wilson. My problem is, how can I put it to you this way? Even Mr. Magoo sees how good he is right now, and if they do not pull that trade to get Butler from New England, I see the New Orleans Saints possibly going on Quincy Wilson as early as number 11. That's how good this ball player is. If I needed a cornerback in this draft and his name was not Quincy Wilson or Giron Conley, I don't want that cornerback in the first round.
So what is it about Wilson? What do you like about him?
Physical guy. He reminds me so much of Ike, the way that he hits people. The thing I like about him is he's versatile. He has starting experience at both cornerback spots, also the slot. When they go into run force, the guy comes up and plays a cover too. He's 218 pounds. They said, well, wow. He runs a 4.54, but I still go back to that thing. Let these kids show up at Indianapolis with their football uniforms on, then let's put a stopwatch on them. Unless they're going to play football in a nudist colony, which might happen with a team going into Las Vegas, I don't see somebody out there exciting me what they're doing in their underwear.
You have really good insight into a lot of the NFL teams. You have very good insight into the Steelers. You know how they think. You're the one that predicted that they would take Ryan Shazier a few years back. No one else predicted that. You just had a sense about it.
I predicted another Ohio State linebacker. I'm predicting another Ohio State linebacker that's slipping on the board, a guy that I say is a poor man's Mike Singletary, but when you look at him athletically, he doesn't impress, and that's Raquan McMillan, the middle linebacker with Ohio State. I like what Tomlin's saying about Vince Williams, but we know what Vince is. Vince is what we call Crash Gordon. He will hit anything in sight, but he just doesn't think before he does.
No, they lost Lawrence Timmons. I mean, they're going to need a little bit more value in there beyond Vince Williams. Even though he knows the system, he's been there. They trust him to a certain extent, but his ceiling is the floor. What is that? What Michael Jordan said? I mean, his ceiling is only so high. Ceiling is the roof.
Well, I tell you one thing though. If that kid Reddick from Temple ends up sliding to Pittsburgh in round 1, they better have the Roadrunner at the table to get that card up to the podium.
So you 3 or 4 guys that you see going to Pittsburgh possibly in the first round.
I'm the anti-draft analyst, like I told you earlier, yeah. John. Man, all I am is football's Prince Charming. I'm trying to make sure the Cinderella shoe fits.
But one thing that it is clear, we haven't mentioned any offensive players in the first round for Pittsburgh.
I don't see any offensive players fitting their needs right now because, 1, this is a loaded draft at wide receiver. 2, if you look at the running backs, after you get past the first 2 or 3, and I would take McCaffrey over anybody. After you get past that, you could find some really good running backs still sitting out there around in the day 3. I mean, go up and look at the Utah kid that had to go home for a while, Joe Williams. He returns in 8 games and has 1,200 yards. Joe Williams is probably the most underrated running back out there. If they want a big physical guy that could catch that they didn't have a good combine, they could go up to Wisconsin in round 5 and find Corey Clemens sitting out there. There's a lot of talent at what the Pittsburgh Steelers need on offense as far as depth issues go. But I don't see a starter in this draft on the offensive side of the ball being able to contribute to Pittsburgh this year.
You mentioned something interesting to me about the Steelers being one of a couple teams that have looked at more quarterbacks in this draft than anyone. What's up with that, and what are your thoughts about that?
My thought about that is that I'm seeing a Virginia Tech quarterback coming in around 3 or 4 and either ended up with the Giants or the Pittsburgh Steelers. As much as they're looking at the big guys out there, I don't see the Giants or Pittsburgh going for a quarterback in round 1. But if I had a pick in the top 10 right now, it'd be no hesitation. If I needed a quarterback, I'm down to Texas Tech. Keep the rest of them. Keep the North Carolina kid. Keep the Clemson kid. Keep them all, man. If I needed a quarterback in this year's draft that I would have any confidence in on starring in the NFL, it has to be Mahomes.
You like him. You've talked about him quite a bit. You really like him.
I look at this guy. He's got the Brett Favre moxie out there on the football field. He's got the Tony Romo in his prime mobility. This is a guy that's going to excite in this league. This is a guy that's going to step out on that field, and I don't care. Any grizzled veteran is going to say yes, sir, to this kid.
And he comes from a passing league, a passing offense, a passing coach. I mean, he has that in him.
Well, he needed to pass, John. I mean, hell, his father threw a baseball for 12 years, so at least some balls were flying around that house.
I hear his name more, like you mentioned, all the stuff that's being thrown around out there. I hear his name being mentioned more now, but we seem to recall.
I think his dad was a pirate at one point. I think his dad was a pirate at one point, if I'm not mistaken. Pat Mahomes, the pitcher.
Greg, does that sound familiar to you, Greg?
Guy was in the league for 12 years. He was a journeyman relief pitcher, but he was a pretty decent pitcher. Finished with a 3.65 ERA.
Yeah, Mahomes sounds familiar with the Pirates, John.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Interesting. Very interesting.
Hey, well,
so he's got
I tell you,
pedigree.
Well, not only he's got pedigree, he's got quality arm. Strongest arm in this draft. Their biggest concern with him, well, he operated out of the spread. As soon as he got up to Indy, as soon as he got down on his pro day, every snap he took was from behind center. Okay, he didn't have no pass rush coming in on him, but man, oh man, you got to see that kid's footwork. However, if I needed a quarterback, What I would do right now, John, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I would do something that's made famous in the NBA. I would tank the 2017 season. John, there could be as many as 8 quarterbacks in round 1 next year.
Wow. Before we close out this edition of the John Harris Podcast on theairnetwork.net with Dave T. Thomas, NFL Guru. Dave, I want to have one last question. If you think it'll be any impact at all with Tony Romo's decision now to go to the CBS broadcast booth, is that going to impact now on a Houston or Denver or another team as far as the upcoming draft and quarterbacks are concerned?
Well, Tony Romo in a TV booth, I liken Donald Trump in the White House. What the F? I mean, I'm sorry, but let's work through the chains over here. I mean, this is going to be a guy that's going to be stumbling and fumbling as much as he did later on in his career. I see Houston having to do one thing, get desperate on draft day. They're not interested in Kaepernick. They're not interested in Cutler. Unless somehow, some way, Cincinnati puts McCarron out there onto the trading block on draft day, I don't see any quarterback in the NFL that could come in and play for Texas right now.
Wow. Well, you know what? We've got, 3 more weeks after this of draft talk coming up. We're going to give you as much information as we possibly can here on the John Harris Podcast on theairnetwork.net with Dave T. Thomas, NFL Guru. Dave, thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to our next meeting. Be well.
Take care, big guy.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of the John Harris Podcast. Join us again next week for John Harris exclusively on theairnetwork.net.